You're listening to Sarah's story, a son hospitalized with RSV on the Child Life On Call podcast.
I'll never forget him, the first blood work. He just looked at me and was like, Mom, make them stop poking me. And, nothing tugs at your heartstrings more than that, because I knew that it was something that was going to help us figure out what was going on. But he had, never gone through something like that and didn't understand why we were having to do that and why I was letting them do that. So there was certainly moments that were very heart-wrenching and, trying to explain that to a 2.5-year-old that, had never even been in a hospital, like what was going on was really sad.
Hi, and welcome to this week's episode of the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, a certified child life specialist. As always, I'm so thankful that you are here listening to these stories and hearing from parents about what it's like to have a child with illness, injury, or medical needs. Hearing directly from other parents who have had similar experiences can help with healing and bring connection. Today, Sarah will share her story about how a very common virus, RSV, turned from mild cold symptoms into a week-long hospitalization. Sarah begins our conversation by talking a bit about herself and her family, and then leading us into the days before her son's illness took a turn.
So my name is Sarah Luden, and I live in Austin, Texas, with my husband, John, my husband of 6 years, and our recently turned 3-year-old son, Parker, as well as our almost 10-year-old yellow lab, Riley Luden. We'll be talking about Parker, and he last October got RSV. So leading up to that, he had never really been sick. He had only been on antibiotics, I think, one time when he was a few months old for an ear infection. But other than that, really healthy and happy little guy. And so the entire process really, threw us for a loop because, other than our normal checkups with his pediatrician, hadn't really had any health hiccups. So leading up to figuring that out, it had been our usual kind of crazy week of schedules. I was traveling for work, and John was juggling multiple, big events and school and all of that for Parker while I was out of town. And Parker had allergies here and there, as most of us in Austin, Texas do. So he was congested and had a little bit of a cough, but we just figured it was usual, allergies or, little cold from daycare or whatnot. But kind of quickly realized after I got home from my trip and we were a few days into it that his cough and his congestion and his breathing was really labored. And so that's kind of when we, put steps in place to try to figure out what was going on. And
So did you guys take him to the doctor?
So we did. We took him to the doctor, a day or two after I got home. We took him to his pediatrician, and even there, everything kind of checked out. It was, the doctor thought it was probably just a regular cold or allergies, because he knew that, Parker had allergies. And he also thought that it could have been teething symptoms, because his back molars were, his last molars were coming in, and so thought maybe it was just added drainage from that. So we had an appointment that Friday and went in and just figured, this would pass, and it was another cold or allergies or nothing really to worry about. So that was the Friday of the week, and then it just kept getting worse. So Sunday, we had a doctor from Remedy come to the house. Remedy is an app in Austin where the doctor comes to your home, which having small children is just the most convenient thing in the world. So a woman from Remedy came, and Parker had his shirt off, and she looked at him and just immediately knew that it was something more serious, because she could see from his labored breathing that he was having retractions and really working much harder than he should have to breathe. And so she, was very calm and very professional, but said, I think that you need to take him to Dell Children's and take him to the emergency room. So that was where it got really real for us. And, I think when she originally told us that, my thinking was, well, we'll go and they'll tell us what it is or give us medicine, and then we'll come home. Or, maybe we just need to go there because it's a Sunday and we can't go other places. She told us that, and we were all kind of calm, but knew, okay, maybe this is obviously just much more than allergies or a cold. So that was the beginning of a really crazy week in the hospital to figure things out.
Sarah and I have been friends for many years, and I remember vividly the morning that she called me to tell me about the Remedies doctor's recommendation that Parker go to the emergency room.
My first phone call is to Katie. I'm like, Katie, what do? I knew Katie used to work at Dell Children's, and I'm like, I've never been to Dell Children's. I'm like, I don't even know where to go, or like, do we go to the emergency room? Do we make an appointment? Like, we had never really had anything like this happen. So I call Katie, and she calmly describes to me where to drive in and where we go in and check in and all of that. So we go to Dell Children's, we go to the emergency room, and they measure his oxygen levels. And I guess that tells them, at what, if we were to kind of go in the queue or if we go in right away. His oxygen levels were below 90, which, we had never even known to measure his oxygen levels before. So they were below 90, so that meant we went straight back because anything below that for, a toddler is concerning. So each kind of step of the way, it got realer and realer for us that this was a big deal. So we went back into the emergency room, and they started to do a number of tests, and they did a chest x-ray. They hadn't done any blood work at that point, but just monitored his breathing for a while. He was still having the labored breathing, and they got the chest x-ray back, and it had turned into pneumonia. So at that point, they didn't know if it was viral or bacterial, or they didn't know what had caused it. So, and we were also, his oxygen levels started to get a little bit better while we were back there. So it was one of those scenarios where we actually had the option. They said, you're kind of on the cusp. His oxygen numbers started to go to the low 90s. And so we thought, maybe this isn't as bad, and maybe, he's on the path to recovery. And so they gave us the option. They said, to be safe, it would be good to stay here in case he gets worse. But now that he's into the low 90s, it's kind of up to you. He could also go home and bounce back, and everything's okay. And, we could tell you, the steps just to, make him more comfortable to wait out the pneumonia. So we decided, better safe than sorry, let's stay. But even at that point thought, okay, it's just going to be an extra night, and they'll just, monitor his levels, and everything will be fine. So we decided to stay overnight, which, looking back, I'm so thankful that we did. So we left the emergency room and went to the first floor of Adult Children's, which is a kind of regular medical surgical floor, and admitted us there. So they continued to monitor his oxygen levels and his breathing, and to think about what we were going to do. So it was a little frustrating to us that we didn't know right away what was causing the pneumonia, if it was viral or bacterial. So it was frustrating to not have a super clear path for how we were going to treat it. But, we trusted the doctors and knew that they were taking the right steps because, of course, there's one that's much more common than the other. So they assumed it was just maybe like a walking pneumonia, but it had just hit him a little bit harder. So that first night, that Sunday night on the regular floor, he just continued to get worse and worse. And so his oxygen levels were really inconsistent. He was having a hard time breathing. And so they made the decision to go ahead and put him on oxygen, just to help make him more comfortable and help his breathing. Even with that oxygen, it was clear that he was more comfortable and not as labored and not working as hard. But, that was a setback for us because we knew if he was on the oxygen, that was, meaning that we were going to be there longer, but we knew that they were taking good care of him. So it was frustrating that he hadn't gotten better, but at the same time, we were really glad that we didn't make the decision to go home because we would have, just ended up right back there. So, having to put him on the breathing support was hard because he had, only had regular doctor visits. He was like, what is going on? Why are all these people, poking and prodding me? At that point, also, they had decided to draw some blood work and do some labs and just see if maybe there was something else here that beyond just the pneumonia that they hadn't figured out, just because he wasn't progressing the way that they had thought. So it was a rough, first night, and nobody slept well, of course. Nobody ever does in a hospital, but he just had a really hard time sleeping and catching his breath. And so, inconsistent oxygen levels and just wasn't progressing the way that they had thought. So they made the decision to move him up to the intermediate care. So we got there, and, there was just more equipment and more support that could help him get through that. So it was kind of one of those things that going in, we thought, okay, we'll get there, they'll tell us what it is, and we'll go home. And each day that we were there, it became obvious that this was much more serious than just a little cold or allergies. So, nobody's ever prepared for that, but it was difficult because things weren't getting better the way that we hoped. So we were in the intermediate care. There was more options there to make him comfortable. They had like a vest, a vibrating vest for respiratory treatments that came in and just kind of shook everything up and helped him clear out his lungs a little bit. So we started doing those, did more blood work, still hadn't figured out exactly what was causing it, even did some precautionary antibiotics. So there was lots of people in and out, even more poking and prodding, and Parker was a champ, but it's hard as a mom to see that. And I'll never forget him, the first blood work. He just looked at me and was like, Mom, make them stop poking me. And nothing tugs at your heartstrings more than that, because I knew that it was something that was going to help us figure out what was going on. But he had never gone through something like that and didn't understand why we were having to do that and why I was letting them do that. So there was certainly moments that were very heart-wrenching, and trying to explain that to a 2.5-year-old that had never even been in the hospital, like what was going on, was really sad. And we still didn't know, a few days in, what was causing this. So that's where I think frustration really set in. And so thankful that we had amazing nurses and family to help support us and help give us tips to make it easier. When you're not going into it expecting to have all this, even tips, Katie, that you gave me, like having a notepad there, so that there was points where John and I were switching off just to go shower or to get a few hours of sleep, having a notepad so that every time the doctors came in, we knew what questions had been asked. We were tracking all his numbers, just so we could make sure that we were doing everything, and that John and I were communicating with what we were asking, and that we had all the information that we could, and that we were being informed in the right ways, and making sure that we were doing everything that we could to figure this out.
Definitely. And I was just trying to think, when did you finally get the diagnosis? When did they tell you, yes, this is RSV? Because the crazy thing with RSV is, like days 5 to 7 are the hardest. So if you aren't anticipating that long of a illness, then you just get worried because your child's getting more and more sick.
Yeah, that was it took longer than we had hoped it would, right? It was probably 4 or 5 days into our hospital visit that we actually knew that he had tested positive for RSV, and that had turned into pneumonia. Because it was taking longer for him to get better than it normally does. They even brought in an infectious disease doctor, and they started asking questions that you would never think would be related to this, but had he been around livestock? Had he traveled out of the country? Like things like that you're like would never expect to be related to that. But we wanted to make sure that we were really understood what this was. So it wasn't until near the end of our hospital stay that we knew for sure that it was RSV. The original doctor that came to the house said that was pretty probable, because that was really common in kids, and Parker had in the past few months surrounding that started a new daycare and was around a new and larger set of kids than he had been before. So that made sense, but there was a lot of unknown in the beginning. So yeah, it was frustrating that it took that long to realize that was indeed what it was. But you're right, knowing that going in, I think would have helped us to understand that it was more than just the pneumonia, and that was what had caused it. But we did finally get to that. We also, I think just because he was in there for so long, and this is funny, I didn't even know this. Nobody had told us this until we got home and we looked at the paperwork, but he was given the mark that he got sepsis while he was there, and understanding that the threshold for sepsis is that can be categorized a lot more easily than it had been in the past. But I think he may have picked something up while he was there, and that had made it even a little bit harder to recover from an infection being in the hospital for a full week. So who knows when that happened or what level it was, but I think it just made his recovery that much harder. so eventually got the RSV diagnosis, and at the very, kind of tail end of the week, they had been telling us, he's he's gonna, do an uptick, and we're gonna start to see progress here, and that type of thing. And I think it was just a day or two longer than most kids do show that uptick. So I was we were glad that we started to explore those other things and make sure that we were doing everything that we could, but was certainly frustrating that he took those extra few days of recovery, and but hey, I guess he just was enjoying those chicken fingers and hot dogs. I don't know.
Exactly. Yeah. Do you have any advice for having to be in a confined hospital room with a toddler for a week?
Yeah. So we were lucky that we had support from our family. So just coming up with a rotation was really helpful so that we could be supportive and, as healthy as we all could. So, taking breaks, and, I think that was the hardest for me. I wanted to be there the entire time. I wanted to make sure I was the one asking all the questions and have all the information, but realized that I had to keep myself healthy too. So coming up with a rotation or a schedule, and that keeps it fun for the toddler too, right? They get to see new faces and interact. We had lots of screen time, which I'm normally not a fan of, but Parker, for the 3 or 4 days in the middle, really couldn't even get out of the hospital bed. So we didn't have a whole lot of options of moving or kind of relocating or a change of scenery. So we did do a lot of screen time, and that seemed to keep his spirits up and keep him happy. And we tried
Yeah,
to
it keeps him
find,
distracted for sure.
distracted, right? So as people were coming in, he wasn't as scared. He had his Blippi is our favorite YouTube show, and Blippi, does all kinds of fun things and plays with construction equipment, and it was something that Parker was really familiar with, so it helped make him comfortable. And then new books were good, just to read him stories, and he loves books, so that was really helpful. But yeah, just making sure that we had a good schedule, that we were all communicating well. One thing that I didn't know that Katie, you told me when you came, was every room had a play mat, so we were able to put the play mat on the floor, or just configure it close to the bed so that he could move. He was obviously connected to his IV and his oxygen and all kinds of different monitoring equipment, but the nurses and everybody was really helpful in times that we did want to move him to that play mat, just to get his body moving. And he lost so much weight while he was there, just because it was obviously nowhere near his regular 2-year-old toddler activity level. So that was a good change of pace, just to get him kind of moving and get a circulation going. One of the most difficult things for me that you don't even realize till you're in a situation like this, was not being able to hold him or cuddle him when he was in the bed for that long. So by day 3 or 4, I was like, oh, I just need a big hug, and I want to feel him close to me, and that was really hard. So even just me sitting in the chair next to him, and figuring out how to configure all the wires or take them off, take the monitor off for a second, just to be able to kind of scooch him over and be able to hug him and cuddle him, was really a good momentum and happy moment for both of us, I like to think, just to have that connection again, and just to feel close to him. That was really special, and something that in all honesty, I think I took for granted, being able to hold him like that. Sometimes I'll complain if I have to, still rock him before bedtime, or if he's being too clingy, and that's certainly never something I will complain about again.
For sure. I remember when I came to visit you and he would just look at you and he'd go, hug, hug,
Yeah,
mama, need a
yeah,
hug. And
I know. I know. And he's so cuddly and so active and physical. And so I think for him that was hard. He was exhausted and couldn't move. He, hadn't really been eating that much, and so he didn't have the same physical ability that, he had, just a few days before that. So I think that was hard for his mind to wrap around that too, that I'm kind of stuck here and I gotta, figure it out. And even, by the time we got home, it was hard for him to, build some of that strength back.
what do you think helped you as his mom and John as his dad the most while you were in the hospital?
I think knowing that we had a really good network of friends and family helping us. One of my other great friends is also a doctor, and so there would be, daily hour-long phone calls with her of, okay, here's what they said. Do you think this is right? Should I be asking other questions? And all kinds of stuff like that. So the network that we have was, really, really helpful. And talking about it, not talking about it, well, maybe talking about it's the right term, but like sharing our experience on social media. I remember a few days into the hospital, I just posted on Facebook, like, here's what's going on. And, once we figured out it was RSV, it's such a common thing, probably not common to have to have it turn into pneumonia and spend a week in the hospital, but it's a really common thing and so many levels of how it can happen. So there was so many people that, not even great friends that I'm still connected with that reached out and said, here's kind of what our experience was like. Maybe you should ask this or this, or here's what worked for us. And so that kind of like broader community connection was really helpful for me, because I love to talk everything out. I love information. And of course you can Dr. Google, and WebMD, but just kind of hearing those other moms' experience. And there's tons of moms groups on Facebook, and just asking them for opinions or insights or seeing if anybody had the same thing. The other thing that, once we knew for sure what it was, of course, my immediate question was, what does this mean long term? Does he have asthma? Was there a reason that this, we got this, more extreme case of it or whatnot? And, of course, time will tell, and it's hard to know that. But that was a really good question for me to ask, kind of that broader community of moms that I knew had RSV, their kiddos had RSV-induced pneumonia. And then just, staying positive. There was certainly periods of time where John and I swapped being the positive, one in the scenario. I would get down about, why don't we know yet? And why aren't we doing more? Or, just get frustrated. And he would be the positive one. And so just being able to support each other in that way, having a community of people whether that's the people in your life and in your city and the nurses, or it's an online community, there's always, people that have gone through similar things, or so being able to lean into that, which is sometimes a very difficult thing for me to do or to ask for, was absolutely invaluable, whether that was being able to talk about it, having visitors. I have a colleague who lived down the street from the hospital who said, hey, can you just come here and like take a shower and just, take a moment? And let's chat. And just having that 30-minute break and a shower not in a hospital was super valuable. And you don't realize that, until you're in it. So people want to help and want to rally around you, and just gotta embrace it. And that was really huge for us. One of the other amazing things that helped get us through the week at the hospital were the nurses. There was one nurse, her name was Becky, and she was our nurse for the night shift one day, and was just so amazing, and would come in and not only check on Parker, but check on whoever else was on duty. I'll never forget one night just being totally exhausted. It was my mom and I were spending the night at the hospital that night, and Becky actually made the bed for us. And, she wasn't our nurse, she was Parker's nurse. And so she was like, okay, here's tips to make it more comfortable. If you, put the blanket this way, or there's this extra, pad that you can put here that's hidden over here in the room, like just little, configurations and comfort type things that we had no idea. And it was such a small gesture, and, something that she probably does all the time. But I remember just starting to cry, and I was like, thank you so much, Becky. Like, she was so wonderful. She even came in at one point in the middle of the night and covered me up because it had gotten really cold, and it was just, that so comforting to know that you have someone on your side looking after your entire family and, making the experience just a little bit better. So Becky was amazing. We didn't know any of their schedules, and, we didn't even know what day it was at that point, but we'll never forget the next night, and it was, 7 o'clock and shift change, and we saw Becky again, and John was there at that time too, and we both just lit up and started jumping up and down like, Becky's back, and, she looked at us through the windows and was waving, and it was just so comforting to know that Becky was going to be there, and she was going to be watching out for us. And so just having that connection with the nurses and knowing that, all of the staff there really cares and was helping us make our experience that much better. And even Parker got to know Becky's name, and you could tell was really comfortable with her. So the nurses were just amazing in helping all of us.
Yeah, that's so amazing because it seems like such a little thing, but the impact it had on you obviously was worth its weight in gold. Like, you still remember it. You remember her name. And to be a night nurse is a really hard thing because a lot of times you have to go in and wake people up, and night is a really hard time to be in the hospital. So the fact that she was one who stuck out with you is pretty amazing. The thing about being in the hospital too is real life doesn't stop outside of the hospital. You can kind of feel like while you're in there, you don't have laundry or dishes or errands or anything like that, but at home those things are still going on. And I think I remember something happening with John when he was trying to get ready to come see you guys. And what happened?
So obviously we were all very sleep deprived, and we were tag teaming, staying up there at the hospital, and props to families that of course do this regularly, but have other kids at home too. Like, I don't know how you guys do it, so big kudos. But he was home, and he was coming back up to the hospital, and we were gonna tag in and out, and he was so tired and so sleep deprived that he gets in his car in the garage, backs up, hadn't put the garage door up. So slams into the garage door, and it was just, something normally that we would have been so frustrated about or whatever. And so, he would have been worried about chipping the paint on his truck, or worried about the garage. And he came and he told us the story, and we just all started dying laughing. Like this situation had put everything into perspective for us, that it was honestly so nice just have a laugh and to poke fun at him a little bit for doing this, because any of us could have done that, going on so little sleep and a stressful week and stressful scenario, and it was pretty hysterical. There was a few moments like that everything else in your brain kind of goes away, and your full attention is on whatever medical situation it is, and you want to, obviously that is your number one priority. So some of those little things like putting the garage door up may just not happen as seamlessly as they did before, but you got to laugh about it and move along and remember that number one priority and perspective. So at least it gave us a good laugh, and at the end of the day it wasn't much damage, so it was entertaining.
One thing that I think a lot of parents who have had hospitalized children know is that just because you're discharged from the hospital, it doesn't mean that everything goes back to normal.
So recovery, once we got home, there was the week in the hospital, and we knew that it was going to take a little bit of time to build up Parker's strength, because his nutrition wasn't what it was, and he just lost some muscle from being in the hospital that long. So a few things that really helped us when we got home was just taking it slow, and I think his mind wanted to immediately jump back into running and playing outside and going to the park and doing all of these things, but we knew from the research that we had done we needed to really take it slow, and we knew his immune system wasn't the same, so we just were really patient with him and ourselves and tried to take it slow. My mother-in-law got us a little mini trampoline, which was so great. He was able to, it still took a few days for him to build up his strength and even to be kind of walking as steadily as he was, because he was just lost a lot of weight and a lot of muscle. So, the first few days would just kind of let him walk and build up and just really be there to support him for that. But then this little mini trampoline was just so helpful, because he was able to stay stationary and hold on to the railing and get to jump and build up that strength, a little bit throughout the day. So that was really helpful. And then bubbles were another thing I would have never thought would have gone hand in hand with respiratory recovery, but the way that they, blow into the wand is a great way for them to build that strength back in their lungs and their breathing. So he is a big fan of bubbles already. So was neat to learn that some of his favorite things, like a trampoline and bubbles, were truly a part of his recovery process. So we would spend a lot of time outside, blowing bubbles, and a lot of time inside on the trampoline. So I think what greater things for a recovering toddler. So, and then I think just really being patient, and we kept him home for a few weeks knowing that his immune system had taken a big hit, and just, like I said, tried to really start to teach him the value of washing your hands regularly and, covering your mouth when you cough or when you sneeze, and using Kleenex and things like that. So the conversation around germs and the importance of avoiding them and protecting yourself, it was time to start to have that more regularly, and he was really receptive to that. We also just became more conscious about, trying to sometimes hide some of those fruits and vegetables in what he was eating at home, making sure he was taking a regular probiotic in his water, making a really big deal about a gummy vitamin and taking that each night, and just building some of those things into the routine, because, he remembered that even, 6 months out now, he remembers that scenario at the hospital and remembers, why those things are important to stay healthy. So making it a conversation throughout the whole family was important.
And if you could describe what Parker has kind of taught you through this experience, or what the experience in general has kind of done for you, what would you say?
Oh gosh, I think I'm so much more aware of the importance of health. I think it's something that I took for granted, probably for my entire family, but especially Parker before. And I think we've really tried to put in just more of an emphasis in our day to day. We easily get wrapped up in the go 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 and let's do all of these things and stay busy, but we've really tried to make more of a conscious effort on let's put practices in place in our family to put an emphasis on health. Let's be more cautious about what we're eating and drinking. Let's get really good about washing our hands and talking about germs and even since the RSV, because I think everybody's immune systems from being in the hospital for a week were down. We've been sick a lot, and it's I think we all ended up getting pneumonia from the hospital. Of course, ours wasn't nearly as bad as Parker's, but it did a number on our immune system. So the past few months have been tough, and we are, I think, especially Parker is definitely turned a corner, but been in a longer term recovery than we realized. So slowing down our pace, being more conscious about our health and taking that seriously, that has been a really good thing for us. And I think when something like that happens, we of course didn't know how serious it was going to be till we were in it, but it just helps you realize the important things in life and gives you, certainly gave us a perspective about what matters, which I think we had in us somewhere, but there's, a situation like that just shakes it back into you that, hey, Sarah, maybe that report that you worked on for a few hours, or that business trip or whatever, or that, the drama, between whoever, like that doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, what matters is my family and that we are all healthy and happy. And this scenario certainly taught us all that. And I think we try to remember that as much as we can, and just to know what a fighter Parker is. I think even while we were there, there was times that we would get emotional or frustrated, and he was confused, but he was, really a champ at 2.5 years, and, still had little glimpses of his personality there. He would make jokes with the nurses and things like that. So, he certainly taught us a great perspective about what matters.
Thank you so much to Sarah for sharing your family's experience with hospitalization, RSV, and pneumonia. I'm sure there are many parents out there who experienced very similar things and feelings and stories to what you went through, so thanks so much for sharing. Another big thank you goes to Janet Anderson Photography, who took the beautiful pictures of Sarah and her family. Janet is local to the Austin area, and you can connect with her on her website, www.janetandersonphotography.com. If you would like to connect with Sarah, you can follow along with her on Instagram and Twitter, and I will link to all of her pages on the show notes page. Thanks so much for listening in on this podcast today. Please connect with me and the other parents who share their stories on our social media pages like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, all with the handle Child Life on Call. We will see you next week.